Am I getting across now? Here's what I'm saying. If loving one another, if identifying yourself as African and relating to each other as African and thinking in terms of each other as African and behaving individually in terms of your African descent and relationship to other people means the overthrow of Europeans, you are going to have trouble in self-love and relating with one another and loving one another. If being able to trust each other, if being able to be reliable in your relationship with each other and keeping your word with each other and supporting each other means that you can then form a collective force, being a majority, against European power, one of the greatest problems you're going to have with each other is what? Trust. We must be what? Suspicious of each other. We must be what? Unreliable in our relationship, one with the other. You see what I'm saying? In other words, the characteristics that are necessary to maintain the European system are bred into the African personality. That's why when I talk about the education of black children, you recognize that the education of black children resembles nothing like the education of white children. The whole curricular approach and the pedagogical approach would have to be different. Because we must put back into our children and into ourselves what has been taken out and what has been repressed if we are to liberate ourselves. But as I'm going to talk in a minute, many of us have bought this stupid idea called standard education and equal education. And it is the buying of those ideas, standard education, equal education, that we've been destroyed and will be destroyed as people. There's no such thing as equal education. No such thing as a standard education. And I talk to you, there's no such thing as standard business. But we bought the concept. In fact, we'll engage in a discussion on education without even defining what we're talking about. We'll just assume education is what we've always been doing and what white folks have been doing all along. It doesn't occur to us that we need to redefine the whole concept. We need to ask ourselves why? For what purpose are our children reading? Why are they learning, man? You have a problem sometimes when your children come back and say, Daddy, why do I have to study this? It's hard to sometimes come up with a reason other than what? Working for the slave master. Yeah, think beyond that. Think how often you say, so you can get a job. You know? And move so far beyond that. You know? And that creates problems. White wealth is stolen. We have been consigned the role of consumers in this system. We think of ourselves as consumers. Our purpose in this world, as far as the world system is concerned, is to buy. Not to produce, but to consume. We measure ourselves against whites in terms of the amount of consumption that we engage in, not in terms of production. We think that a man who drives a Cadillac is equal to the man that makes it. Yeah, and we confuse the two things. So we think we drive Cadillac like white folk, we live in houses like white folk, we eat like white folk, we talk like white folk, you know, we are like white folk. That's a lie. It's a cruel deception. You will never make it up in the world and gain any respect among people and have any power through consumption. You only gain respect and you only gain power through production, not through buying, ladies and gentlemen. No African nation or any group of people can buy themselves into respect and buy themselves into power. And you have leaders who misled you in many ways by comparing your income against white income. You see, a terrible misleading situation. Because income and wealth are not the same thing. You may have an income of $100,000 a year because you're getting a check of so much per month. That's quite different from a man who has an income based on the fact that he owns $10 million worth of property. You see, so when people are running the income game on you, because you know when you blow that check, when you get fired next month, you're done. That $100,000 of wealth is nothing. In fact, it is not even wealth. It ends right at that point. You see, but a man with $10 million worth of property has got a lot more resources and possibilities. You see, but our leaders have compared income instead of wealth. And this has created a tremendous problem with us. As a matter of fact, it is time for us now to question black leadership, period. You look at the condition that black people are in today, and crack, and unemployment, and homelessness, and all of the other kind of things, and you basically have the same black leadership you've had for the past 30 years. It is about time for you to begin to question the validity of that leadership. If these people were running for president and so forth, you would have thrown them out of office a long time ago. Because you would say, hey, look at when you came in and look at where we are now. How can you validate your leadership looking at the concrete condition of our people? We don't call our leaders into task. You've been led by the NAACP, the Urban League, and various other so-called black organizations which are really not black and never have been from their inception, and have led to the situation where we are today, where economically we are suffering to a very great extent. We've had leaders who protested against our not being hired in places where we spend our money. But we haven't had leaders who have talked about what? Owning those places. I have a business here at 125th Street, and while I can appreciate Adam Clayton Powers' struggles against discrimination in hiring, and that was a magnificent struggle he engaged in years ago, and finally getting blacks hired in those places. Yet I look at that same street today, and you can count on the fingers of one hand how many black people actually own anything on that street. Even though 95% of the customers on the street are black people. And yet you have a Charles Rangel and a bunch of others there who seem to have little or no concern about that situation and deal with that situation. And we send them to Congress year after year after year after year. We have to check this kind of thing out. We have been run in by what we call non-economic liberalism. NAACP with no economic program, the Urban League with no economic program. I have a book here, a beautiful book. They put out a beautiful book every year. The State of Black America, 1988. They'll have the State of Black America, 1989. The state of, every year, State of Black America. Wonderful statistics. But no theory, no program. See? No program at all there. And yet we permitted ourselves to let these people set policy for us. And we are reaping the results out of it. They overran Washington, Booker T. Washington's program. They overran Marcus Garvey and others. And now we can see the results of it. We in fact believe in individual wealth as against group wealth. We are, in a sense, the only true Americans in America, black people. We really believe in that stuff. We really believe in individualism. And yet we are the most stereotyped people in the country. We are viewed as stereotypes by other people. We're rarely seen as individual by other people. And yet we are the most firm believers in individualism. It's a pity. Do your own thing. You do yours and I do mine. Period. Because the reality is all other ethnic groups act in terms of their ethnicity. And the reality is America is a pluralistic society. not a society of individuals. The reality is that there is no individual power without group power. You cannot become an individual ultimately until your group becomes collectively strong. The reason why we see white people as individuals is because of white power. If they had no power and they were powerless, we just see them as a bunch of powerless poor people. You have some Negroes who play tricks on their mind that say, I don't see color. As if you're not seeing color matters. Because you don't see color means that someone else, that doesn't mean what? That somebody else don't see you as what? Colored. Yeah. So we think if we deny our color and deny ourselves as people of color, that somehow that miraculously means that the other people don't see us as possessing color. Stupidness. Terrible. And you'll see it almost all the time when a Negro is getting ready to give his money away to white folks or to justify not supporting African people. You'll almost hear that statement in America. I don't see color. You see? And not recognizing that's exactly the state of mind you have to be in so that other people can pick your pocket. You see? Not seeing color. You can ultimately only gain individual strength through group strength. I talk to college students sometimes by saying, you know, many of you think that you're here at this college, particularly those in predominantly white colleges and so forth, because you come from, you know, some big family, because you scored high on the SATs, because you studied hard and you stayed away from the parties and you did all of this. I'm right here at the great university you are here today. Lies. You think you're the first person that came from good families? You think you're the first generation that had good families? Black people have had good families from the beginning. You think you're the first generation that studied hard? You think you're the first generation of blacks who can score high on SAT exams? Yet I grew up in a generation of people where it didn't matter how high you could score in the exam, how much you had studied. There were just certain colleges you were not going to, period. Period. That was it. In fact, they didn't even give you the exam to take. Don't bother to apply. How did we get into those schools? Not because of the scores we made and so forth, but because blacks without degrees, the blacks who never see the inside of a college and others, put their bodies on the line because of black power, because of the collective activity of black people. That collective activity then permits you as an individual now to have a choice of colleges. It permits you to choose your profession. It permits you to say, well, I'll be a computer engineer, I'll be this, I'll be that. But remember, that choice is based on what? Group power. And the willingness of the black group to back that right up. It is not a right that is inherent in you as an individual, and it is not a right that is just given to you simply because you were born or simply because you went to the right school.
All right.
And when those people in those universities and other places decide they want to take it back from you, you will have to be that black community again that will stand up and say no. And we forget that often. You know, we got a lot of people now, they got a little position in the world, and they want to make it, you know, they want to say it's all the result of their own individual assets. You see, no, it is group power that makes individual choice possible. Which means then that we try to increase our wealth and power as black people, we then must increase it in terms of increasing the power and wealth of the whole group. Or else, individual power and wealth is a mere illusion. I look at Johnson Publications, for instance, and I look at the difference between that magazine in the 60s and what it is today, and how in many ways it cannot deal with real issues in terms of black folk. And even though he may have millions of dollars, in a way there's a fundamental weakness there. Why? Because he cannot afford to do what? insult is what? White advertising. So his wealth is really not what? Power, as it would be among the others. His wealth, but in a way, his wealth is also his what? His weakness. I, being poor and without anything, can say what I want to. If he had, though, a black nation doing business and creating wealth, he too could say what he wanted to say. Because he'd have that wealth and nation of people supporting what he had to say. But because he must depend upon another people, he cannot afford to insult them. And yet, when you deal with the real issues of black people, you must insult white folk. And so the idea is that you can have individual wealth, not tied up to the wealth of black people as a group, is an illusion of wealth and an illusion of power. And yet many of us have bought into this kind of situation. So we got a lot of us trying to run this little individual game without understanding that it has to be all or none. We've got caught in our educational problems because we believe the white man is invincible, that he cannot be defeated. Miserable belief. All people and throughout history, all civilizations rise and fall. Many people ask me, why did we fall as black people? On a metaphysical level, if you're the first to rise, you'll be what? Basically the first to fall. That's the way life. Civilizations go through what? Cycles. There's not been one yet that has lasted for what? Forever. You had Romans, Greeks, Africans, this one and that one. And ladies and gentlemen, the white man is going to go one day too. I don't find it hard to believe. And I'm sure you could have convinced a Roman that one day the Roman Empire would be gone, or the Athenians that one day Athens would be gone, but they're gone. And yet somehow in our psyche as black people, we just kind of see these people as what? Lasting forever. As invincible and cannot be overthrown. The Japanese didn't think so. When you get that mentality then, you give up. We've been sold the idea of education as a solution to all of our problems. Education is very important. Because I know many of you were raised, you can't get an education. Fine, nothing wrong with it. Except that it is only a part of the solution. It is not the total solution. We, in a sense, ought to believe ourselves to be in eternal servitude. When I mentioned here earlier that when our children ask us why should they be studying math, or why are they studying this and that, about the only excuse we can give them for it is so that they can get a job for other people. There's the assumption that somehow white people will always own everything and control everything, and therefore the best we can do is to qualify to work for them. But isn't there a higher motivation? Isn't there a higher cause when you say you're studying math so that you can overthrow white economic power? So that you can outthink those people? That you are at war with these people economically, socially, and militarily? And the reason why you are studying is so that we can win this struggle for our lives and survival as a people? If you really saw education not as a job market, not as a way of merely moving up on the social ladder, but as necessary to your very survival, then you wouldn't have as much problem as you have getting down to these schools, seeing that those children learn what they should learn. Right on. You see? But you have not yet come to the realization that education is about survival, not about jobs. I was talking to a friend of mine just before I left this afternoon, and he was talking about what a book he was reading called The Genetic Wars. How the Europeans have taken an African fever, dengue fever, and through gene splicing, increased its potential, its dangerous potentials, and how it can be sprayed on populations, so forth, and used on populations. I read an article in the Wall Street Journal, now maybe 2-3 years ago, long piece, that talked about the U.S. germ warfare research, where 23 American universities were engaged in that research. Also the New York Board of Health, also the Department of Agriculture, also MDs. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, the university system of the United States is as much a part of the United States military establishment as is any other institution. Jobs are secondary to their functions. You see, when these planes drop bombs on your head, when these laser beam weapons fire from 500 miles out in space, when these germs such as AIDS and other germs will be released on us and have been released on us, you must recognize that those things have not been created by people in the streets. Those things have been created by professors, by PhDs, and in the university laboratories of this country. That's why educated people are the most dangerous people in the world. It is not the crack dealers that will destroy this earth, ladies and gentlemen. It is not the muggers that will destroy this earth, ladies and gentlemen. It will be people with PhD degrees with 2 fair-haired children and a 2-car garage. Upstanding, moral, church-going citizens who, after they leave service and rest Sunday night, go Monday morning to make bombs and weapons to destroy themselves, their children, and the whole of mankind on earth. And it's those professors who don't even teach very often, who are doing research for the government and doing research for the army and so forth, to such a degree now that the United States scientific establishment has been skewed in its orientation toward research by military research, which is one of the reasons why it cannot appropriately compete with Japan, because its best brains have been used in the creation of death machines as against machines that can be used for commerce. Understand it? That is why, you see, it is not enough for you to go to white schools and get degrees from white schools. You must own those schools and control those schools. I'll be back to that in a minute. One of the reasons why we have problems too economically is the people we see racism as a psychomoral problem. Racism essentially is an economic problem. It is essentially a rationalization for maintaining economic, political, military, and other kind of controls over another people. It is not an attitude problem. We think that merely we change white folks' attitude. If they realize we believe like they do, and we do just like they do, they're going to come and love us. You are out of your mind. Do you think merely by having these people believe their creed that you're going to get out of the situation you're in? No. This racism is a justification and a rationalization for maintaining economic, political, and social dominance. Even the apparent change of racism by whites is still going to be used to maintain their racial dominance. That is, when whites become less obviously racist in their overt attitudes, their wealth and their power will still remain where it is. As a matter of fact, they have learned that one of the best ways now of maintaining their power is to appear to be less overtly racist. Now, you think getting black mayors and governors elected represents some advancement for black people, and I realize, of course, we've been through this game before. This is the second Reconstruction anyway. You know, we're getting duped again. And you think that the moving of black people in the classes, in wealth and so forth, represents some advance for black people. I call it neoclassism, as a parallel with what? Neo-colonialism, where a minority which seeks to maintain its power, where it does not have numerical advantage, recruits from the very people it oppresses, so that those recruits can be used to maintain the power and position of the original group. So the European recognizes that he can more, as efficiently or more efficiently dominate African economic affairs by having Africans as head of government than having himself as the chief governor of African countries. And now we're going to get a black middle class that puts a black face on white power. Let us not be deceived. So we think then that the problem that we are facing with white racism is a problem of morality. And this is in part the result of being led by preachers. You see, and not having a strong secular leadership in the black community. Because people tend to see problems in terms of their profession. And ministers, being concerned very much about moral issues, tend to moralize most issues. You see, but there's much more going on in this world than just a bad attitude. The other problems that we've looked at, the other reason why we have problems with economics is we see our economic problems are resulting from civil rights. And let me just be rapid in terms of the time. Civil rights. It's like a prisoner saying, I have rights in prison. You know? Civil rights are not the same as what? Liberation and so forth. They're not the same as independence and control of oneself. But the thing that I want to get across is, we have this faith in laws. We think as long as the Supreme Court is up there, the government is up there, we have civil rights laws on the books. Everything's going to be cool for us. Let me just quickly tell you one thing, ladies and gentlemen. If it gets down to the point of where the white man has to make a choice between feeding his children or yours, no amount of laws on books, no amount of Supreme Courts, no amount of black governors and mayors or anything else is going to have him feed your children before he feeds his own. The laws are only as strong as their enforcers. And the people who pass the laws are also the same people who enforce the laws. And when it comes to the point where they have to make a choice in terms of their survival and power as against your own, they will ignore the law or seek to or not enforce the laws. So ultimately, your salvation lies in power, not in goodwill of the other people, not in the love of the other people, not in laws on the books and all of that. It ultimately must rest on pure power and the ability to stop other people from doing harmful things to you. Anything else is not adequate. And yet we've had a bunch of leaders who think that laws on books are adequate to protecting the future of our children and of our people. You must realize that that's a very flimsy basis. We believe in standard business practice. No such thing as standard business practice. You know, we have this idea that there are practices that don't have no regard to race or color. Wrong. I had to deal with the person the other day. Oh, this is standard business practice. No, these are white folks' business practices that have developed within a white European context, built around a white reality, a white economic system, white goals and values and so forth. This is not standard business practice. This is a practice among these people. You see? But when we buy that as standard, then we inevitably are defeated in our economic efforts. And this standard business and this idea of standard is the problem, as I pointed out earlier, even in education. Standard education. No such animal as standard education. There's only education that gets you where you need to go to people. I've stated again and again that the educational destiny of the black child is revolutionary, that the educational destiny of the white child is what? Conservative. The major focus of white education is to maintain the advantage that they already have. Black people not having advantages do not need to get the same education because you're not being educated for the same reason. You're being educated to remove that advantage. You're being educated to feed your starving children. You're being educated to benefit from the wealth that is being stolen from the lands of your ancestors.